Can hear you now. Ah, right. So we're in business. Yes. Great. Oh well, it's wouldn't be the same if something didn't go wrong. This is what comes of being an amateur. Anyway, I'll start again. Warm welcome to everyone, and thanks for joining me tonight. First up is a video slideshow and photos from Philip's song, and he was, before civilian teachers were employed by the army schools, the army used to do their own work, and he was an outreach instructor during the day and a residential house father when the daytime job was done. This is his words. He thinks John McClevey and his wife Elaine were the principal and matron of Kinloss House when he was there. He says, if his memory serves him correct. Steve Barry mentioned me. Where's Steve? It's back. Okay. We're having a lot of problems with the sound tonight. Something wrong somewhere. Right. Our chat tonight is with Dan Foo, whose father ran the halfway house and nightclub restaurant in Bukit Timah. And I'll explain more about how that came about at the beginning of the interview. And the last slideshow is from Gary Durler, I think his name is. If you're in Singapore, if you're at St John's in 67 to 69, you'll find a lot of faces on these video very familiar. I could only identify two, but all the other faces were familiar. What he done was he uploaded photos to the photo gallery about 5 years ago, and I was expecting him to come back and add some captions, but he never did. So there's going to be a challenge at the end of the show for those that can name the people involved. Something else about the gallery. Oh yeah, I think it's Pam. Were you at 53 Goodwood Road at any time? Somebody on here was. But anyway, what it is Mike Reed has uploaded some photos to the gallery tonight, and he lived at 53 in 1975. His father was in the Green Howards. I think they were the last regiment to leave. But the view, he's got two photos from the doorstep of 53, one looking up the street and one looking down. So I don't know whether... Hi, Julian. Hi, Sheila, Pam. Very lovely. John Bell. Oh, great. Yeah, we're all coming in tonight. Okay, let's get going. Otherwise we'll be here all night. Right, first up is Philip's song slideshow. hope you found that interesting. I certainly did anyway. The photos themselves are quite small because I don't know if you remember years ago when the internet first started, you had these dial-up modems, and if you put a large photo on anywhere or try to email a large photo, it took ages before it actually got delivered or appeared. So that's why everything was quite small in photograph-wise in them days. I can't remember when I got hold of them photos, but never mind. Before I do the interview, I just remind everybody. Okay, next up is an interview with Donald Foo. I think I explained the circumstances at the beginning of the video, but yeah, I think you'll find it interesting. None of you know who he is, but I think you might find it interesting. I'd like to welcome to the program tonight is an old friend of mine called Dan Foo. Now, you probably won't ever have heard of him, but his father used to manage and own the Halfway House nightclub and restaurant in Bukit Timah, and my father was a regular customer, and that's how I got to know him. The reunion came about in Perth. I had a feeling Dan lived there, so I got in touch with him, and sure enough, he did live in Perth, Australia. So we managed to link up during my visit there, and now, of course, we're in touch all the time. And I've invited Dan on tonight to talk about his father and the halfway house and the servicemen that used to come and go from the places, etc. So welcome aboard, Dan. What's your earliest memories of your
My
father?
earliest memories of the halfway house was back in the 50s. I mean, back in the 50s, I wouldn't have been even 10. I would probably be in my 8 or 9 years old. So that was when halfway house, my dad bought it from an Australian man back then. And he ran it from the 50s till he came to Australia in the 80s. So when he came here in the 80s, he was still leasing that nightclub. No longer the nightclub, it became a restaurant. And then, of course, he sold it years after that when he came back to Singapore. But yeah, so my fond memories of the halfway house is in the 60s and 70s when I was in my teenager years. I think it's about the same time as you being a teenager, but our path never crossed because Donald was the link between us.
That's right. Yes, my father introduced me to Donald, and I used to call at the halfway house quite often to see him. Yeah.
So Donald is my cousin. So he works in a restaurant, as you know, back in the days where you have a restaurant. So my dad has got his nephew, which is Donald, and another nephew works there. So it's all like a family business back then. And restaurant business or nightclub business back in those days are not like what you have today. You run from 7:30 a.m. till 1 a.m. 365 days a year. There is no break. So when I grew up, I never knew of a holiday. I never knew what is the meaning of a holiday. But so did he. I mean, our only excursion for holiday is go shopping in Singapore. That was what it was, you know.
Our first year there, in 1967, our first Christmas, my father and booked the family in for the Christmas dinner at the halfway house. So we had our Christmas dinner at your place, and the following year we'd moved away to Sussex Estate, you know. But yeah, you had all the family down there having Christmas lunch.
Oh, that's wonderful. So lunchtime is still pretty civil because the fun starts at 9 p.m. where the live band starts till midnight. I don't think you ever had a chance to go there in the evening.
I do remember the
So
band.
we were
Used to have a permanent band, didn't you?
Yes, in
They
fact there was
sometimes
some
played in the
yeah there was
afternoon.
some yes there were some very famous faces that went through the restaurant.
Right.
To name a few, Anita Sarawak. Anita Sarawak is a household name in Malaysia. She started her career in Halfway House as a singer.
Yeah.
Nobody knew her back then. And also, Miss Singapore also performed at that restaurant back in the days. So that restaurant has got some pretty um, like nesting ground for some of those more prominent people,
Yeah.
prominent singers around the place. Yeah, because back in those days, in the 50s and 60s, there are not many nightclubs that services the British and Australian armed forces or service people,
That's
and
right.
the Halfway House is just one of the very very few.
It was ideally situated, wasn't it? Because you had nearby was RAF Tenga, and
Yes,
where I lived, and just off Dunedin Road at Hong Kong Park, a lot of the private lettings there was occupied by RAF personnel from who were based at Tanga. So my father was the exception because he was army, but a lot of them were RAF personnel. So yeah, there was quite, and of course Bukit Timah was probably the largest town outside of Singapore town itself, wasn't it?
yeah. Back in those days, I mean, Bukit Timah. I think a lot of the service people knows where it is because it is quite like a central place. It used to be called the 7 Mile back in those days. It's not metricated yet. So Bukit
Right.
Timah is often known as the 7 Mile from Malaysia, from Johor Bahru.
Right.
So if
Right.
you say I'm going to 7 Mile, you know that you're going to Bukit Timah. But of course,
Yeah.
today it's all different now. If you go to that spot today, I think somebody sent a photograph. It is just flattened. It was meant to be an MRT, but that never came to fruition.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, it's totally changed Bukit Timah now because Beauty World is gone, and you've got the modern Beauty World shopping centre now, haven't you?
Yes.
There. Yeah, it's totally changed from the old Bukit Timah. Yeah.
The last time I passed that place was in 2013 or 2012.
Hmm.
And I was standing at the corner of the street where you look across the road to where Halfway House was, but it was just a bushland. It was just flattened, totally flattened,
Yeah.
unrecognizable. I mean,
I can
that's my,
imagine. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
also a lot of fond memories growing up there, and spent a
Yeah.
lot of time in my holidays.
Yeah. Yeah, the I used to spend a lot of time in Beauty World across the road, the shopping centre. Um, but the other thing, of course, your father did expand as well. Um, so which came first? Was it the place in Johor or was it the place at Changi?
No, the place in Halfway House was the first,
Right, yeah.
and then it was followed by the Changi Corner House.
Right.
Changi Corner House is actually where the airport is now, which is no longer,
Yeah.
that location is no longer there.
Yeah.
And the one in Johor Bahru called the Straits Garden nightclub
Uh-huh.
uh, was the last one to be opened.
Right.
So in Johor Bahru at that time, there were only two nightclubs. One was Mr. Foo, my dad's, and the other one was the Straits View, which is not too far away. It's a hotel come nightclub. They were
Yeah,
the two
yeah.
decent nightclubs there. Yeah.
Hmm. So yeah, he obviously employed a lot of people running an expanding business.
Yes, yes. I mean, look, restaurant business is a very romantic view, but when you look into the below the surface, it is a lot of hard yakka, as you know.
I can
A lot of
imagine.
hard work. Yeah.
It, yeah, and of course tough business in them days as well. Yeah,
Back in Halfway House in the 50s and 60s, that area is notorious with gangs. Before Lee
mm,
Kuan Yew cleaned it up,
yeah,
so my dad would actually pay the policemen to watch over the place to ensure that the gangs wouldn't come and extort money from the restaurant because that's what they would do.
yeah.
in halfway house, but the whole place got cleaned up in the late 60s and 70s. And by the time I was in my teenager years, and those kind of occurrences were just a memory of the past kind of thing,
Yeah, I can imagine.
which is good. I mean, that's what Singapore was, very, very rough back in the 50s, and it just cleaned up.
Yeah, yeah, because it was developing all the time, Singapore, wasn't it? It was,
Mm, mm, mm.
but yeah, it's totally different nowadays.
But
Yeah.
I'll tell you a very funny story. During the daytime, they have a lunch special,
Hmm.
like a $4 lunch special. Back in those days, I guess $4 is a lot of money. And he would have a special called pork chop. You know, pork the chop like a schnitzel.
Yeah.
It's a pork chop with chips. So you have a Malay Muslim man coming to the restaurant, and he would say, "I want pork chop, but no pig, no pig meat, but I want a pork chop." So it was my dad used to come home and tell us those sort of funny stories, and we were laughing.
I can imagine.
Yeah, but
Lovely.
no, yeah.
Yeah. So you then, after working in your dad's business, you then left, and what happened then? Did you go to college or?
Yeah, well, in 1971, when I was 17 years old,
Mhm.
I left the country to come to Australia, and I studied along with my other siblings. So we came to West Australia, and I did engineering, and the other brother did dentistry, and another one did engineering, and another one went to Sydney. So we all left the country
Yeah.
by about early 70s, except my sister, who came in much later.
Mm.
And my dad joined us in 81, and he retired about that time, 80, 81. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh. The when obviously when they were modernising and rebuilding Bukit Timah and that, the government purchased your property then, did they?
Yeah. Back in the early 70s, the government had the MRT plan, the mass rail transit system.
Mm.
And the mass rail transit system had a station proposed in the location of where the restaurant was. So
Right.
he was given time to move out and sell to the government. Unlike today, being the country that Singapore was and Lee Kuan Yew was, a very tough government. He was offered a certain amount of money, less than the market value, mind you.
All
So
right.
he had to sell the restaurant in the late 70s to the government, and he saw that as being a good time to quit also because he's been working, for many years non-stop,
Yeah.
and he yeah,
Yeah.
and he
Uh,
came to Australia. He came over here in 81.
uh-huh.
He didn't like the country here. He went back in 82. He didn't like Singapore anymore, and he came back and he never went back.
Oh dear, yeah. He probably couldn't settle after working all his life, yeah.
Yeah, but he settled very well. I mean, at when he retired in 81, so he was in his early 60s when he retired, or if not
Yeah.
even 60, so very, very young he retired.
Uh-huh.
So he led a very happy life here because we were here to support him, and we see him very often together with mom and dad, and talk a lot from time to time about the restaurant and all of his philosophies about how to run a successful business. It's all to do with sweat equity, I guess.
Yes, yeah.
Tom, a very funny story. When I came to Australia in 71, you're on your own, right?
Yeah.
You have to cook for yourself, you have to wash, you have to clean, you have to walk to school. And I thought life was hard. Hell, I got to better write a letter. There's no phone there. I better write a letter and complain how life was. But then
Yeah.
I thought his life was 10 times worse than mine, so I never complained.
And like the other interesting thing you said before was when Donald got married, um, this was at a time when the British forces were leaving Singapore, and yet after the wedding, you went back to the halfway house, and it was absolutely packed
Packed. It
with,
was packed with people. That was in
yeah,
the early 70s. When did you say the armed forces left?
I think 72 was the final year, I think.
Okay, could have
Um,
been that around that time, 72. There was a
yeah,
lot of people. It was just chockers. Yeah.
yeah. Because I know I was reading somewhere that when the RAF people left and that, and Singapore forces took over the airport and that, there was a lot of stories about the Singapore forces dropping into the halfway house, for a bevy before going home, a
Yes,
drink before
yes.
going home, and that. Yeah, so you obviously change of customers. Uh,
Yeah, that's right. The change of the customers from the armed forces to local businessmen.
mm,
Uh, but of course, in the restaurant business, you turn over revenue by people drinking, right?
so yeah,
And the British and Australians as we are now, we know that we tend to drink a lot more than the Asians, although some
yeah,
Asians drink
yeah.
a lot too. Yeah.
Actually, I've got one
Uh,
of my father's beer bills at the end of the night. He was drinking Tiger beer at the time, I think, and he bought a packet of cigarettes, I think. So that's all listed, and I forget how much
okay.
it came to now, but I'll dig it out and put it up so people can see it.
All right. Okay. I still have his matchbox, would you believe? His halfway house
Yeah,
matchbox.
yeah.
I think I have it in my drawer. Yeah, my wife Barbara was saying, um, there, here we go. Let me show you.
That's the one. Yes, yes.
You see that? And back then, the telephone number is only that. Such
Mm,
a small number. Yeah,
yeah.
so it's
Very good.
interesting. I still have it.
Yeah. Oh, smashing. Yeah. Anyway,
And the funny thing was, Tom, when he came to Australia, a lot of the restaurant cutlery, the knives and the forks and the spoons were brought here.
yeah.
Yeah, so some of our siblings are still using it.
Oh, lovely. Yeah.
Mind you, they were top quality, they were really top quality English cutlery sets. So it was
Yeah.
really good. Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Just before we go, I better thank you
You're
again
very
now.
welcome, Tom, and
Yeah.
thank you for the invitation.
Uh, well, I hope you enjoyed that. Um, next, before I play the last video, next fortnight I've got an interview with Dave Roberts lined up. Now you may have seen his videos actually of the Changi Youth Club. He's got two of them out at the moment. They're on the Facebook, not on Facebook. They might be. They're on YouTube and they're on my site. But he's updated them now actually as well. So that'll be a special program interviewing Dave Roberts, who was a youth leader, or youth helper, whatever, at Changi Youth Club. That's in a fortnight's time. So the last video, there's a challenge that goes with this one. As I say, those that were in St John's 67, 69, and who are members or registered with the photo gallery, um, if you recognise anybody in a video, go to the photo gallery and leave a comment on the photo. Just log in and besides seeing the photographs at full size, you can also leave comments. So look up Gary Durler. Just go to the search engine and type it in, and up comes his folder. And you can look through the photographs, and if you recognise, I only recognise Bob Simmons and Mick Roberts, um, but a lot of other faces were so familiar because I was there at the same time. So I'll leave you with that, and I'll see you in a fortnight's time. So here we go.